other thing that you will have to consider, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it is pets. Just a couple of bits that you need to know. If a tenant wants a pet, and this applies to existing properties as well, the tenant must make the request to you in writing. The landlord must respond within 28 days, and you can only decline the pet on reasonable grounds. Now, I know what you're all going to do. You're all going to go, Dawn, what's reasonable? What's reasonable to me may not be reasonable to you, and it may not be reasonable to you. So there are some things to consider that are pretty obvious, like size of property, type of pet, head restriction, so sublease restriction. So, for example, if somebody living in a one-bedroom flat, or a one-bedroom house for that matter, would like a husky, I would argue, no, there's not enough space. Would you agree? But if they're living on a three-bed farmhouse and they'd like a one-bed a husky, then you need to find another reason if you're going to decline it, okay? Because why? They have a garden, they have adequate this, they have adequate that. But what I want you to consider, and what we are going to create as letting agents, are these things here. So we're going to create a process for tenants to request a pet. We may even create a pet application form. Because for me to say to you, "Hi Nick, can I rent your property? I have a pet." What does that mean? Have I got a goldfish? Have I got a hamster? Have I got a gerbil? Have I got a horse that I want to bring and live in your garden? And also there is a piece of legislation that is all about animal welfare. And this is all jokes aside, that could actually be really useful in the application form and process that I am going to create, because one of our agents have already done this, one of our member agents that we work alongside, because it asks a variety of questions about that pet and the safety and the care of that pet. So, how long will the pet be left at home alone? What are the hours that you work? All of those things that are not necessarily for our benefit, they're to make sure that the pet is being cared for, but they will enable us to make a reasonable decision as to whether we feel we should allow you to have a pet as a landlord. Does that make sense, guys? So we need to create a process, we need to create a process for response, and we can only decline if it's reasonable. Now, there's a £7,000, the magic penalty's back again. And they can also take you to the Ombudsman if you don't adhere to this in due course when that becomes a thing. It's actually not acceptable for them to just ignore the tenancy agreement and have a pet, just to be clear. They can't just decide, well, you can't unreasonably decline it, I'm moving one in without telling you. That is a breach. They have to make a request to you in writing, and you have to make the decline within 28 days or the acceptance. Now, what the guidance says is that you cannot unreasonably decline. So, for example, if they've got a goldfish, Jesus Christ, let them have a fish. Just use your common sense. Again, where they've not considered this, I think during this consultation of renters' rights, there was a part where they were going to allow us to take an additional 3 weeks deposit. This was a tabled amendment, and another 3 weeks deposit for those that had pets. That was a cracking idea because it gave landlords a bit more security than 5 weeks. Labour said no. So we can still only take 5 weeks, and we also can no longer insist on insurance, which was something else that they talked about. And do you know the reason why we cannot insist on insurance? Because the thing that the government said we could insist on doesn't exist. There is no pet insurance for tenants in the private rented sector. It's not a thing. But they told us for months and months on end that in the renters' rights, we could insist on it. Yes, so if there's a superior lease that says you can't have pets, then you can't have pets. It's a straight decline. I'd get the superior lease, the freeholder, the block management, the people that are the superior to enforce removal of the pet from the tenant that's got it there. Because you've got to remember, on purpose-built flats, and I always say purpose-built flats, but wherever there is a superior lease, that supersedes everything below that. I remember once we had a negotiator and they made a tragic mistake and moved somebody into Willowdale Grange with a pet, willingly, right? And Willowdale Grange, if anybody knows where it is on Aldersley Road, the committee down there, do not argue with them. They're coming for you if you do anything wrong. Rightly so, because it was wrong that we moved somebody in with a pet. We should not have allowed it because there's a no pets policy. And literally we had to rehouse that tenant, make sure that there was suitable accommodation because we had messed up as the agent and allowed that tenant to move in. The tenant wasn't at fault, it was us. So we had to sort that problem out. So I'd go to the superior lease, make them go to the agent, because ultimately it's a no if superior lease says no. If there is a freeholder and you own a flat in a building that specifically the superior lease says no pets, you immediately write back to the tenant and say, I have to decline your request on the basis that the superior lease doesn't allow pets, and that will be done. Very, very complicated in rent to rent because you've got more than one party. But rent repayment orders are going to be really big for rent to rent people because previously the superior landlord could not get prosecuted under a rent repayment order. That's gone. Superior landlords can be responsible for rent repayment orders now. But superior lease, like a freeholder or so forth, you can straight decline. I mean, look, the reality is this. I don't think this is going to be a big problem because all of us that don't want to accept a pet will find a reason why you decline that request. And again, I don't think it's going to be a massive, massive problem. What you've just got to be prepared for, and this again is where agents come in really well because we're ready for it. They already, because they've heard it in the news, they're already talking to the tenancy managers, I want a dog, and they'll go, no, the landlord said no. You can't say no, I've seen it on the news. It's like, you're a little bit early, mate. It's not till the 1st of May. And then you need to put in your request in writing, and there's a whole process you've got to follow before we can give you an answer. So it's just about managing their expectations, because the reality is nothing is really going to come of this. But what I will say to you is one of the things specifically in the guidance they have said, because one of the things that somebody said, what if the landlord is allergic to dogs or cats or whatever the case may be? That is not a reason you are able to decline them, because what they're stating is it is not your home. So don't use that excuse because that won't work.